Dear students, viewers, and the subscribers, welcome to the IAS Mentor. This would be our lecture number 78 in the series Indian Polity. In this lecture, we are going to see again a very important topic, that is the parliamentary procedure. In the last topic, we have understood the topic of parliamentary privileges. So we'll move forward and we'll look into the topic of parliamentary procedure. So basically, what is a parliamentary procedure? So parliamentary procedure is the rules, the protocols, or even the conventional practices based on which the various business in the house is carried out. So when you say what are the various business in the houses, say for example, the various business in the both the houses of the parliament might include asking questions, introducing certain motions, passing certain resolutions, introducing certain bills, discussion on any of the proposal that is introduced in the house, a constitutional amendment bill. So these are the various proposals, or these are the various business in the house. And when you talk of the parliamentary procedure, the procedure would regulate as to how these business are carried out one by one in the houses of the parliament. And that's exactly what you're going to understand. So first, let me introduce as to how things happen in the parliament on a given day. So you can just look into this particular diagram. You will understand as to how things happens in the parliament on any given day. On any given day, the parliament normally begins with what is called as a question hour. So the question hour is the first hour in both the houses of the parliament, both in the Lok Sabha as well as in the Rajya Sabha. After the question hour is over, then they enter into what is called as zero hour. So normally what happens in the question hour is the questions are raised. The MPs can raise question to the ministers. The MPs can raise questions to the other MPs. So basically, these are all the things that happens in the question hour. So question hour is a very effective tool in ensuring the accountability of the government. And after the question hour, the house enter into the next thing, what is called as a zero hour. It is called a zero hour because it exactly begins at 12 p.m. So therefore, it is what is called as zero hour. So let us now try to understand. As we'll proceed further, we'll try to understand what type of questions are asked in the question hour, what happens in the zero hour. So once the 0 hour is over, then there's a lunch break for both the houses. 1 to 2 p.m. is a lunch break. But however, you'll understand right from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. in case of Rajya Sabha and 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. in case of Lok Sabha is where all the other important business of the house is taken up. Be it introducing a bill, be it introducing any proposals for discussions, be it a motion, be it a resolution. So everything that the parliament has to take it up. So they take it up only in the second half of the house. In the first half, only the questions are asked in the question hour and then subsequently in the 0 hour as well. So this is basically how the parliamentary procedure, or this is how the duration of the parliament in a given day. And then subsequently within this, a lot of things happens in the parliament. So now we are going to understand as to what happens in the question hour, what type of questions are asked in the question hour, what happens in the 0 hour, what happens during the second half of the house, what type of motion shall be introduced, and then subsequently we'll also understand as to how the bills are introduced, what is a procedure to get enacted the bills, what is a procedure to enact a constitutional amendment bill, what are the other types of bills. All these things will proceed one by one as we'll discuss this particular area. All right. So for the first thing that you are going to understand is what happens in the question hour. Okay, so before I enter into that particular area, you can see that from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. is where the Rajya Sabha functions, whereas 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. I think earlier I have said it in another voice, so please make that correction. 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. is where the Rajya Sabha functions, and 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. is where the Lok Sabha functions. So can anyone tell me why for the Lok Sabha 1 hour extra, but for the Rajya Sabha it is only 2 to 5 am? If you know the answer, please put it in the comment box. Now with that explanation, we'll just move further. We'll try to understand the different types of questions that is asked in the question hour, because the first hour of the parliament is basically what is called as the question hour. So if you look into the question hour, so basically in the question hour, 3 types of questions are asked. So what are the types of questions that are asked? So first is what is called as a state question, second is an unstated question, and then there is a short notice question. Now what is common between all the 3 types of question? In all the 3 types of question, there is a notice that is required. Notice that is required means, say for example, a member of parliament who wanted to ask a question. Suppose being I am a member of a parliament, I wanted to raise a question to the minister regarding what is happening in that particular ministry. because I feel that the functioning of the ministry is affecting the public. So for example, I wanted to know how much food grains has been distributed by the public distribution system in our country. So therefore, I wanted to ask this particular question to the corresponding minister as an MP. But if I want to ask this particular question, there are two ways I can ask this particular question. So it can be something that I wanted a oral answer from the MP, from the minister, or I can look for a written answer from a minister. But in both the cases, be it a oral answer or be it a written answer that I expect from the concerned minister for the question that I wanted to ask, I should give a prior notice to the concerned minister. When I say prior notice to the concerned minister, it is not that on a given day an MP can go and just raise the question in front of the minister. Because why it is not advisable? Because the minister may not be aware of all those things. In a ministry, a lot of things happens. So therefore, the minister to give a very, I would say, a correct answer or an accurate answer, he needs some time. So probably first he has to be informed that such so and so question has been asked. So therefore, the minister can prepare and then he can come and give the answer. So one thing that you have to keep in your mind is whenever a question is to be asked in the parliament during the question hour, a prior notice is to be given. So probably the MP will issue a notice to the speaker that he wanted to ask so and so question to the concerned minister. From the speaker, it will go to the concerned minister. So when it comes to the state question, for all the three types of question, notice is mandatory. But when it comes to state question and unstate question, in both these categories, as per the rules of the house, a minimum 15 days notice is to be given. So how many days of notice is to be given? Minimum 15 days notice. It can be more than that, but minimum 15 days notice. So that means when a MP is having an intention to raise a question, he has to tell or he has to put it in front of the presiding officer that he wanted to ask so and so question to the concerned minister, and then it will be informed to the concerned minister and 15 days notice will be given to him, and then subsequently he will answer on a particular day. So this is what will happen in case of a state and an unstate question. But however, what is the difference between a state and an unstate question? Now, state question are those questions, whenever the question is raised by a particular minister, it is distinctively denoted by an asterisk symbol. So it is denoted by an asterisk symbol. So therefore, when a question is a state question, it is not only denoted by an asterisk symbol, it also means that the concerned minister has to give a oral answer for a state question. So while the question is put in front of the minister in written form, but how he gives the answer, he has to give the answer in the oral form. So therefore, when the minister gives an oral answer to the question on any given day, as it is fixed by the presiding officer, two supplementary questions can follow. What do you mean by two supplementary questions? Supplementary questions are a follow-up question. So for example, if the minister says that we have, through the public distribution system, we have given 1 lakh tons of food grains. So among that, the concerned minister can ask, so the supplementary question could be, okay, can you give me the distribution of how it has been distributed to various states? So of this 1 lakh ton that has been distributed in a particular month, what is the distribution to different states in our country? So therefore, this could be one supplementary question. So now try to understand, while the person has to ask the first question and it has to be given a notice, on a given day when the minister gives the answer, the supplementary questions can follow. So the supplementary question will be an oral question and an oral answer will be given by the minister. So maximum of how many supplementary questions can be allowed for a particular state question? A maximum of 2 supplementary questions are allowed. So this is the basic understanding you should have. Now the next thing is what is called as an unstate question. What do you mean by an unstate question? In case of an unstate question, a written question is given to the minister by an MP, and here also 15 days notice is mandatory. But after the notice is issued, after 15 days is over, on a day that is fixed by the presiding officer, the minister will give a written response. He is not going to give a oral response. So therefore, this is an unstate question. It is not distinctively marked by an asterisk symbol as in case of a state question. So therefore, the MP, when they raise a question, they can choose to use whether they wanted to ask a state question or an unstate question. In both the cases, 15 days notice is important. And then in case of a state question, a oral answer is given where there are 2 supplementary questions can follow. But in case of an unstate question, it is only a oral written question and only a written answer can be given. And because it is a written answer, there can be no supplementary questions. And then the third type of questions that can be asked in the parliament is what is called as a short notice question. So how is a short notice question different from that of a state question or an unstate question? The short notice question is different from that of a state question or an unstated question, because in case of a short notice question, the minimum notice that is to be given to raise a question is less than 10 days. It is less than what? It is less than 10 days. Whereas in case of state question and unstated question, it is normally not less than 15 days, but short notice question means less than 10 days they can raise the question. As the name suggests, what is short notice? Short notice means the time that they have to wait to raise a question may be less than 10 days, because they wanted to ask a question which is related to an urgent matter. So probably the MP who wanted to ask the question, who cannot wait for a long period of time, so therefore he can ask the question immediately. So that's basically what is a short notice question. So different types of questions that can be asked: state question, unstated question, short notice question. What is common in all the three things? The common thing in all the three things is notice is important in all the three cases. But however, how much notice? In case of state and unstated question, more than 15 days, at least 15 days. In case of short notice question, less than 15 days. In case of short notice question also, there's an oral question, so oral answer will be given. In case of stat question, oral question and an oral answer, maximum of 2 supplementary questions are allowed. Whereas in case of an unstated question, written question, so therefore a written answer is given by the minister. So this is what you'll have to remember with regard to the questions. Now the next thing is what is called as a 0 hour. Once the question hour is over, so then the house enters into what is called as a 0 hour. As the name suggests, the starting is 12 noon, so therefore 12 p.m. it is also called as 0 hour. And also there is no separate agenda when it comes to the 0 hour, so we can say that it is an extension of what is called as a question hour. But however, what is the difference between a question hour and a 0 hour? In a question hour, if an MP has to raise a question, he should always give a prior notice, a notice of minimum 15 days, a notice of less than 10 days. But when it comes to the 0 hour, if suppose let us assume an MP wanted to ask the question on the same day he can give the notice, and then on the same day he can ask the question, is what he can do in a 0 hour. So 0 hour means that you are bypassing all the formal procedure, and if you immediately wanted to ask a question, you can ask the question. So that is likely to happen in what is called as a 0 hour. But then the big problem is that while in a question hour, once the questions are admitted by the presiding officer, then the concerned minister has to give the response. It is mandatory for him to give the response. But whereas in a 0 hour, it is not mandatory for the minister to answer the questions, because as you will understand that yes, the minister may not be prepared, so therefore the questions can be asked, but the ministers, it is not necessary for them to give the answer. But however, try to understand, in a parliamentary democracy, the moments the question are asked, that itself puts a government on pressure. So therefore, asking the questions whether you get the answer or not becomes a very important part of what is called as the parliamentary democracy. So that is the tool which is 0 hour. And one peculiar feature of the 0 hour, the 0 hour is nowhere mentioned in the constitution. The 0 hour is nowhere mentioned in the rules of the house. And how do we follow the 0 hour right now is majorly based on what is called as the parliamentary convention. It is merely what is called as a parliamentary convention, nothing more than that. Okay, so this is what you'll have to understand with regard to what is called as 0 hour. I'm sure that you are quite clear about all these things as to what is a state question, what is an unstated question, what is a short notice question, and what is a 0 hour. So it should be quite clear about all these things. With that, we'll move forward. We'll try to understand the different types of motions which is introduced in the parliament. So after the question is over, question hour is over, 0 hour is over. Then the next thing is you go to the second half of the house. In the second half of the house, a number of things happens, including introduction of bills, including introduction of various motions. So first we will discuss the motions, and then in the next coming lectures we will discuss about the different types of bills. Different types of bills is a very, very important topic. I would say the most important topic from the parliament chapter, because every year there's a question on bills. Especially there is question from topics like money bill, finance bill, constitutional amendment bills. So therefore, when I take up this particular topic, first thing I'll make you understand as to how the bills are different from one another in terms of the subject matter. But that we'll do as we'll take it up. Today we'll try to understand the motions. Now, what do you understand by a motion in the first place? A motion means a proposal that is introduced by any member of parliament in the house. That member of parliament can introduce a proposal, and why he is introducing the proposal is to elicit the response of other members of the house, to see how others are thinking about it. So that is basically what is called as a motion. Say for example, motions include a no confidence motion. Now what is a no confidence motion proposal? To say that the government is not having majority in the legislature. So if I am a member of parliament, I feel that the government is not having the majority in the legislature, that is in the Lok Sabha. So therefore, to prove that, I can introduce a proposal. I am introducing this particular motion. But we'll have to see how the other members of parliament are reacting to this. So therefore, motion is what? Motion is a proposal which is introduced by a member of parliament to elicit the response of other members of the parliament after a thorough discussion on that particular matter. So this is basically what is called as motion. If you look into our parliamentary system, there are different types of motions that can be introduced. So what are the different types of motions that can be introduced? So the first and foremost motion that can be introduced is what is called as adjournment motion. So the adjournment motion is a very, very important motion that can be introduced. So we will try to understand one by one all these things, starting with adjournment motion, what is no confidence motion, what is confidence motion, what is motion of thanks, what is calling attention motion, and also privilege motion. So the first thing that I am going to take is what is called as adjournment motion. So what is an adjournment motion? First of all, you will have to understand this adjournment motion can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha. So try to remember certain things that I am saying. Why it can be introduced in the Lok Sabha only? Because whenever an adjournment motion is discussed, I said motion is a proposal, and then it will be put to discussion, it will be subject to discussion and will be maybe put to vote. It is not that every motion will be put to vote, but most of the motion will be put to vote. In case of adjournment motion, a proposal is introduced by a member of parliament and in the Lok Sabha, and then it is discussed in the Lok Sabha, put to vote in the Lok Sabha. But if the motion is passed with simple majority, if suppose adjournment motion is passed with simple majority, then that would amount to what? That would amount to censure to the government. Censure means embarrassment to the government. And remember, as per the parliamentary system, the government is accountable only to the Lok Sabha and not to the Rajya Sabha. So therefore, the embarrassment can come only from the Lok Sabha, not from the Rajya Sabha. So therefore, you'll have to understand, as per the rules of the House, the adjournment motion can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha and not in the Rajya Sabha. I am repeating it. The adjournment motion can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha, not in the Rajya Sabha. Now, what is this adjournment motion? So adjournment motion is a proposal which is introduced by a member to look into a matter of urgent public importance. Suppose if I feel, suppose I am a member of parliament, I come across a news article that there is an incursion that has happened in the borders of India by a neighboring country. That's a news as a member of parliament I come across, but I do not know what is happening actually. So I wanted to discuss about this particular matter. So if I have to discuss about this particular matter or any of the other matter also, I can bring it to the notice of the parliament by what is called as an adjournment motion. As the name suggests, what is an adjournment motion? An adjournment motion is, once this motion is accepted, once this proposal is accepted, it suspends all the other business of the House. Whatever may be the prior business that is to be taken up today, but once an adjournment motion is accepted, then all the other business will be suspended because the priority will be given to this particular matter. And there will be an elaborate discussion that will happen on this particular matter, and after the discussion it will be put to vote, and if the motion is passed with simple majority, then there is a embarrassment to the government or there is a censure to the government. But however, as per the rules of the House, if an adjournment motion is to be introduced, first of all certain conditions has to be satisfied. It has to be supported by minimum 50 members in the Lok Sabha. Unless and until it is supported by minimum 50 members in the Lok Sabha, it will not be accepted by the presiding officer. So for the presiding officer to accept, it has to be supported by minimum 50 members in the Lok Sabha, and once accepted, then they will introduce this particular motion, and then there can be discussion on this particular matter. And most importantly, the subject matter is not specifically mentioned what should be discussed in the adjournment motion. The only thing it is saying is that it should not relate to any of the other specific matters which is already pending in the House. It should not relate to any specific motion that is mentioned in the Constitution. Say for example, impeachment of a judge of a removal of a judge of a Supreme Court, impeachment of the president. For all those things, already a separate procedure is mentioned. So therefore, those things cannot be part of adjournment motion discussion. So it should not relate to any other specific matter which is already there in the Constitution. It should not relate to a matter which is sub judice, a matter which is pending in the court. So those things cannot be discussed. So apart from that, any of the other things can be discussed in the adjournment motion, and elaborate discussion happens. And after all the discussion is over, then the matter will be put to vote, passed with simple majority. Then it is an embarrassment, it is a censure to the government. But however, the government need not resign if an adjournment motion is passed, because it is not equivalent to that of no confidence motion. So therefore, what is a no confidence motion? A no confidence motion, the basic essence is, that to see whether the government is having a majority or not. So who wanted to see whether the government is having a majority or not? It is usually the opposition party who wanted to see whether the government is having majority or not. It is opposition party who wanted to prove that the government is not having the majority. So therefore, no confidence motion as a tool, who will usually introduce this particular motion? It is usually introduced by a member of parliament in the opposition party. So therefore, you will have to understand, so this is to prove that the government is not having the majority, the opposition party MPs are likely to introduce this. And we know that the government is accountable only to the Lok Sabha, which means the government needs to have majority only in the Lok Sabha. So therefore, where this no confidence motion can be introduced, it can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha as per the rules of the House. And for the no confidence motion to be introduced also, it has to be supported by minimum 50 MPs in the Lok Sabha. Unless and until 50 members support the introduction of this particular no confidence motion, the presiding officer, that is the speaker, may not allow for its introduction. Is there any valid reason to state as to introduce a no confidence motion? There is no reason to state. Without stating any reason, they can introduce what is called as a no confidence motion. Provided it is supported by 50 members, the presiding officer might allow for its introduction. And in a no confidence motion, once the motion is introduced, there is no restriction for the members of the parliament to discuss when this motion is introduced. That means they can discuss on any subject matter. But whereas in an adjournment motion, they have to discuss on the subject matter on which it has been introduced. So therefore, there is no restriction on discussion. But however, after the discussion is over in the no confidence motion, then it is put to vote. And if the no confidence motion is passed with simple majority, what is a majority? If it is passed with simple majority, then the government has to resign. Because if it is passed with simple majority, then it is understood that the government is not having the majority. So therefore, the government has to resign. So this is basically what you'll have to understand. But however, please keep it in your mind, very, very important. The word no confidence motion is nowhere mentioned in the constitution. It is only as per the rules of the House, this no confidence motion is there. I think it is rule number 198 of the Lok Sabha, which allows for the introduction of what is called as no confidence motion. So therefore, keep in your mind, the no confidence motion is nowhere mentioned in the constitution. Now the next type of motion is what is called as a confidence motion. So what is a confidence motion? How is it different from a no confidence motion? The same thing, it is in both the cases to see whether the government is having the majority or not. But whereas the no confidence motion is more, which is introduced by an opposition party, where to prove that the government is not having the majority. But whereas a confidence motion is a more a defensive measure, which is taken by the government itself, where a confidence motion is introduced by any of the ministers in the government, in the parliament, to prove that they have the majority. So before the opposition members can introduce a motion to prove that they do not have the confidence, the minister voluntarily come, or the government or any of its ministers can voluntarily come and introduce a motion in the House and prove that they have the majority. So therefore, this is basically what is called as confidence motion. So try to understand what is confidence motion and what is no confidence motion. If the confidence motion fails also, then the government has to resign. But the only difference is who is introducing it, whether it is the opposition party or whether it is the ruling party who is introducing it. Okay, so this is the basic difference you should know. And there is also next thing which is called as motion of thanks. Now what do you understand by motion of thanks? Motion of thanks we already discussed. Now what basically we have understood about the motion of thanks? If you see motion of thanks is introduced in two circumstances in the parliament. What are the circumstances under which the motion of thanks is used? The first circumstance under which the motion of thanks is used is first session after the Lok Sabha election is over. That is the first time. And the second time we have seen is when? And the second time is that first session every year. So I will put it first session every year. First session every year is nothing but the budget session, and then first session after general election. First session after the general election. So these are the two sessions. These are the two times when the motion of thanks is introduced in the parliament. And what happens in the motion of thanks? Now try to understand, motion of thanks is nothing but to thank the president for making a presidential address. Two instances where the president make a presidential address is the first session after the general election is over, and also the first session every year. The first session every year is nothing but the budget session. So normally in these two sessions, the president delivers an address to both the houses of the parliament, and this presidential address is just an address which is prepared by the government. The government prepares this address and give it to the president, and the president just delivers it. During the first session every year, the speech is related to what the government wanted to achieve in the next 5 years. And in the first session every year, it is like a report card of what the government has achieved in the previous year. So therefore, once the president delivers his address, the government wanted to thank the president for making the address. So therefore, to thank the president, they introduce what is called as a motion of thanks. So this proposal is basically to thank the president. And when this proposal is introduced, then what happens? Then there's a discussion on this particular matter. And then finally it is put to vote. And please understand, if this motion of thanks is not passed with simple majority, remember, the motion of thanks has to be introduced in both the houses of parliament and separately. And if the motion of thanks is not passed in the Lok Sabha, then it amounts to what is called as a no confidence motion. That means it is automatically considered that the government is not having the majority, so therefore the government has to resign. But if the motion of thanks is not passed in the Rajya Sabha, it has no effect. It does not hurt the government. So therefore there is no problem if the motion of thanks is not passed in the Rajya Sabha by simple majority. But if the motion of thanks is not passed with simple majority in the Lok Sabha, then that is considered the government is not having the majority. And then the next type of motion is what is called as calling attention motion. What is calling attention motion? Calling attention motion is introduced by a member a proposal wherein that proposal is seeking to understand as to what is happening related to an urgent matter in our country which is concerning the public. So it can be anything. Say for example, suddenly there is high inflation in the country which is hurting the people. So therefore any MP can raise this particular motion in the house to ask probably the finance minister or any of the concerned minister as to what the government is doing to address the issue of what is called as inflation. So this is basically what is called as a calling attention motion. But however, how is it different from that of the adjournment motion? While calling attention motion, where a very brief discussion happens. There is no elaborate discussion on that particular matter. Whereas in an adjournment motion, a very elaborate discussion happens. And secondly, in an adjournment motion, it requires 50 members to support this to introduce a proposal. Whereas in a calling attention motion, it does not require the MPs to support it to introduce this particular proposal. So therefore, there is a lot of difference between what is called as calling attention motion and adjournment motion. In fact, a calling attention motion may not be put to vote at all, but whereas an adjournment motion is put to vote. So therefore, calling attention motion is only to see as to what is the authoritative statement from the particular minister. So to have a very brief discussion on that particular matter. And then the last thing is what is called as a privilege motion. So what is a privilege motion? We have also discussed that the parliament has got what is called as parliamentary privileges. So the members can also use the privilege. And whenever the privilege of the parliament is breached, so therefore the person who is breaching the parliamentary privilege can be punished. So you have seen how it has happened in the M.S.M. Sharma case, how it has happened in the Keshav Singh case. If you want more understanding of the word parliamentary privileges, go and watch our previous lecture. So go and watch lecture number 77 where we have elaborately discussed about what is the parliamentary privileges. If any person who is violating the parliamentary privileges, so therefore they can be punished by the parliament for the breach of parliamentary privileges. But before an individual is punished, this matter or this proposal is referred to a particular committee in the parliament to discuss on this particular matter elaborately. So this matter is referred to what is called as the Committee on Parliamentary Privileges. Now once a matter is referred to the Committee on Parliamentary Privileges, the Committee on Parliamentary Privileges will look into this particular matter and they will discuss about this particular matter. And once they will discuss about this particular matter, the Committee on Parliamentary Privileges, and then subsequently the committee will submit the report back to the House. Now once the committee submits the report back to the House, then the House will decide whether to punish this individual or not. So therefore, once a report is submitted by the Committee on Parliamentary Privileges, a privilege motion is introduced. So therefore, the entire House will decide as to whether the individual should be punished or not for the breach of parliamentary privilege. So a discussion will happen on this particular proposal and then finally put to vote. And as per what is decided in the voting, then by majority they will decide as to what type of action is to be taken for the breach of parliamentary privileges. So this is basically what is called as privilege motion. So privilege motion does not have any impact upon the government. It is nothing related to the governance also. It is only related to the breach of parliamentary privileges by an individual. Whereas adjournment motion is related to the censure to the government. No confidence motion and confidence motion is again related to the government. If the government fails to get it passed, in case of the confidence motion, they fail to get it passed, or if the no confidence motion is passed, in both the cases, the government has to resign. So both the things can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha. Motion of thanks introduced in both the houses, but if not passed in the Lok Sabha, it is automatically deemed to be a no confidence motion. Calling attention motion, nothing is passed against the government, but this is introduced to seek an authoritative statement or the view of the government on this matter, which is of urgent public importance. Parliamentary privilege, just to see whether a particular member has breached the privileges or not, and if he has breached, what is the punishment that shall be given to that individual. So these are all some of the important motions. This is not the exhaustive motion definitely. There are other motions that can be introduced in the parliament also. But if you go back last 20-25 years, UPSC has not gone beyond these motions. So therefore, it is very important you also understand what is the requirement of UPSC rather than just reading whatever that you can find. When you prepare as a student, you should be able to know from where you will have to draw a line. Suppose if there is no limit on that particular subject matter. So therefore, it is very important we restrict what is relevant to the examination. So not only in UPSC, in other competitive examination also, these motions are more or less sufficient. Alright, so with that we come to the end of our discussion on this particular topic, parliamentary procedure. So please have a look into this particular question. So this would be lecture number 78, sorry. So making a small correction, lecture number 78. So come to the question. Consider the following statements. The no confidence motion is mentioned in the constitution. Is it mentioned in the constitution? So see to it. The adjournment motion can be introduced by both the houses of the parliament. Can the adjournment motion be introduced in both houses of the parliament? The defeat of motion of thanks in the Lok Sabha leads to fall of the government. How many of the statements given above are incorrect? This is very, very important. Again, you will have to understand whether it is correct or incorrect. I have many times repeated in the class that one of the things that has helped me to repeatedly clear this examination, the UPSC examination, is because of the regular revision and because of the regular practice. So I will also request the students practice it. Apart from the time that you give for a study, it is also very important that you do regular revision and the practice of the previous year questions. That is going to extremely help you in the examination. With that, we are coming to the end of the discussion. And if you like this particular video, please share it with your friends and family members, and it is going to be extremely helpful to the students preparing for the UPSC examination. If you have any queries, you can reach out to me. You can think me as a guide, a mentor, a friend, whatever it is. You can reach out to me for any queries related to the UPSC examination or any other state service examinations as well. Thank you once again. All the best.